This is Ron Kloppenstein, and you're in the hot seat on a Media Monday. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the hot seat on this Media Monday. I'm Ron Kloppenstein. My guests today are Susan Nackley Mojave and Kathy Contino-Turner. In the 1980s and 90s, they were on TV screens every day with WUTR-TV 20's Eyewitness News. We're going to talk about their time bringing us the news and how media has changed in the years since. Welcome to the show. I'm going to start with you, Kathy. You began your career at WTR on April Fool's Day in 1981.
Believe it or not, April Fool's Day. It was interesting because that was my first day on the air. But when I went for training, and I remember it was Reagan had just been shot.
Oh.
And the newsroom, I showed up to
That
go
was your
through
first
and
day?
watch.
Was
Well, no, I
something-
showed up to watch and to see how everything was going.
Yeah.
And it was the day, Reagan had been shot and everything was in disarray. Little did I realize that would be kind of
How it all was.
the life, right? That would be the life. And I remember I replaced a girl by the name of Joanne Early.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat there in the studio and I watched her with all these men around her, wiring a microphone up through her shirt and not worrying who was in the room. And I thought, oh my God, I'll never be able to do that. Yeah, I did it.
Yeah. No, was that at WTR?
That was at WTR, yeah.
What was it like that first day? Like, did it make you realize this is what I want to do?
It made me say to myself, I wouldn't have hired me. I didn't have the clothing. I remember buying a suit that was white, and you didn't wear white.
Why?
Because the two cameras. What happened was, if you were wearing white, it made you almost were glowing.
Oh,
you also
okay.
couldn't wear. I'm wearing royal blue. I wear it a lot now.
Yeah.
But you couldn't wear it because we had a blue chroma key.
Oh, like a green screen.
Yeah, it's not. It's green screen now, but it was blue then. So you couldn't wear those. So I didn't really realize, and it took a little getting used to. But we had actually weekend news at the time.
Yeah.
So I was Saturday, Sunday, and it was 12-hour days. Mm-hmm. Saturday, Sunday, go out and report, and then come back and anchor 6 and 11.
Wow.
Right, and then Monday, Tuesday was during the day just reporting.
Mm.
I was there from 8 until 6:30, and then Wednesday was like a half day because otherwise my hours would have been crazy. But yeah, and then Thursday, Friday off.
What was your day like when you worked when you had to both report and anchor the news? Like, what was your day like?
Well, it changed, and Susan will agree. We were a small group.
Yeah.
And even
Six, you said, right?
even back then, 6. Yeah, even back then. When Bill Knowles was news director, and you would come in and you would do 5 or 6 stories. And some would be packages, which are long pieces, Kathy Contino reporting for Eyewitness News. And then when I became news director in 84, I was actually the youngest woman television news director in the United States that year. I was 24 years old.
Wow,
and I got the job because I probably took the least amount of money. But then we had some things that we did that, again, the morning reporter had to pick, 5 or 6 stories. And then the afternoon reporter would pick 3. And
so the morning reporter would do 5 or 6?
And we were on film
my
first 9 months.
Stories?
Well, you have what is called an assignment editor, and you're also paying attention to what's going on around you, and people are filling in with ideas. And I always had a file, an active file, and then a follow-up file. And, and there's certainly, stories that, for example, when the plane crashed that killed the kids from SU, one of our people was smart enough to look at the manifest, and we found Suzanne Miazga, who was from Marcy.
Oh, yeah.
So we always tried to localize. If there was a big story going on, we didn't do the package showing the national whatever. We took it and localized it. So there's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah.
And it's not like you just come in every day and it's the same, and it's not.
Well, Susan, why don't I bring you to this now? So you were with WUTR from 1987 to 1996. During that time, you anchored the original noon broadcast and won an Associated Press Award for your coverage of Sara Anne Wood abduction. And you were part of the first live coverage of the Children's Miracle Network.
Yeah, we did. Children's Miracle Network was 92, I think, right? When first Children's Miracle Network.
I remember going for training
we went to
in Anaheim, California, to get telethon trained, one of my many useless skills right now.
They spent a lot of money they didn't need to spend, because I went the year before you went. Yeah.
The Children's Miracle Network flew you out to train you how to do the telethon?
Yes, and actually, I shouldn't say that because, growing up, having children, PTA mom.
Oh, yeah,
that
right,
really
right,
did.
yeah.
That information did help me.
You probably learned a lot about fundraising in general,
Absolutely.
which is a good skill to have.
Yes, and how to ask for money.
Yeah, right.
But it was a time in news that was quickly changing because of technology. We were shooting, as Kathy said, we were on film.
Okay.
We had, if it was too cold, the camera didn't want to work.
Oh, really?
Absolutely.
So
Batteries,
is
because batteries would
recent,
die.
is it 80s you had some of these
Well, film
instances?
was me, kind of,
So
and
what's the
then we
difference,
switched.
though?
But we switched from film to what was called the ENG, Electronic News Gathering.
Mhm.
With film, you had to be off the street by 3:30 because you had to drop the film off. Actually, where Park Outdoor used to be on Oriskany Boulevard, and they had to develop the film.
Oh, wow.
Then
So
they
you
brought
actually
it
had
up
to
to
develop it before
Oh
you
yeah,
aired it.
and then they bring it up to the station, and there's a term A and B roll, and people don't realize what that means. The A roll was your audio,
Mhm.
and the B roll was extra video, and you'd run the two pieces of film at the same time.
Yeah.
And then in January, we finally went to ENG. But the problem with film was you had to take a little magnet and erase, and you had to find the exact soundbite. Now, with video, you could go back if you screwed it up.
Yeah.
But if you screwed it up on film, you lost the soundbite.
So you were actually using magnets and developing and cutting film in the 80s.
Yeah, our photographers were doing that.
Wow.
And thank God we
Yeah.
went to video because it made it so much, because you had to pull people off the street and you couldn't cover certain stories
to have the film developed
to get the
for
film
air.
developed.
Yeah.
It was kind of, it was
So
crazy.
what were the ENGs?
ENG was called Electronic News Gathering. You had a huge camera, you had a battery pack,
Huge battery.
and a big deck. And they
What
had
was the deck? The recorder?
the deck
like
to
the VCR
record. Yeah,
recording
it was
deck?
huge.
Yeah.
It was huge. When I see these guys out now with
With
these
the
little
little-
tiny cameras, and they can edit on their computer, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
That was very cumbersome. And you
Yeah.
had what was called an umbilical cord, which
connect
connected
it
the camera to the deck.
Okay.
Right, so you could turn on and off from
Oh,
the camera.
yeah.
Although poor Bob Hajek, God rest his soul. Bob, we lost Bob this year. Bob
Oh.
was our engineer, and I love that man. He was just, he'd look at something if it was broken, and it was automatically fixed.
He was
You know,
magic.
he was
That's good to
magic.
have.
But he finally ended up, because the boys kept breaking the umbilical cords,
Yeah.
because they were very, very dainty. Remember, they had the little prongs? And he gave us other cords, so we had to turn on the deck at the deck instead of turning it on at the camera.
Now, if you watch sitcoms, especially in the 80s, you can sometimes see like when they went from film to video. So can you describe like for the listeners like what the difference is and how it looks? It's a little bit, I would say maybe like
Film is richer
yeah.
than the first videotape. Now videotape, and actually it's digital tape, right?
And in high def now makes
High
it
def.
look.
Oh,
right.
But then
Mm.
we thought, going from one to the other, we could see a major difference.
Like what could you see? Was it crisper? Was it like more
It's richer. That's my word
Yeah.
that I would say. Richer,
And to
more
us,
developed.
at
Yeah.
the time, we thought much more
It-
3D,
faster.
realistic looking
Yeah.
at the time. And
Right.
now, of course, it's even more so. But
Yeah, right.
it was a time when technology was changing. We had typewriters.
Mhm.
Really?
We had two-way radios that we would secretly communicate.
Yeah.
We
if
had little
saw-
code words, so
if
that
we saw
because
something
people,
happening.
So like if WKTV was
they were
listening,
listening, they couldn't
oh
tell
my
what
gosh,
we
this
were.
is so cool.
Yeah, what we were doing, like if there was a fire or a murder.
What are some of your
something.
codes? Can you tell me now?
I don't even
I
remember.
can't
I
remember
love
now,
that, yeah.
but we
Yeah.
we had our own way of
Yeah.
communicating.
No
It-
cell
Right.
phones.
No cell
Oh,
phones, and research wasn't Googling something.
Yeah.
For example, Kathy said how we were trying to localize something, and you'd find out, oh, they were in such and such school. We don't have a picture of this person. You'd go to the school or go to the library and find a yearbook with their picture. I mean, that's the work
Yeah.
that it took to get the accurate information.
And they did the whole group did a lot of extra. They did
Like
a
what?
lot of extra work on their own. You were on, for example, when the bridge collapsed,
Right,
Thruway
right, right.
Bridge. That was a Sunday. Mark Harris, who was a photographer for us, calls me and said, "Hey, the bridge collapsed on the Thruway." So I said, "Well, meet me at the station." So we get in the truck. We realize we can't get there in the truck. So we had this crazy helicopter guy. What was his name? Lothar. And he would land that helicopter up on Smith Hill in between those guide wires. It would
Wow.
make me so nervous. But he took Mark.
Just thinking about it makes me
And
nervous.
our video made it on,
Yeah.
I think ABC, CBS bought it, and I think
Wow.
everybody bought our video because we were able to get in the air
Yeah.
quickly. But again,
It must have been an exciting time.
yeah,
Exciting and stressful.
and stressful.
What was
Looking-
stressful about it?
Well, I would say looking back, there was you were very much on your own. No cell phone. Hey, what do I do?
Oh yeah, yeah.
No, oh, hey, you were on your own.
Yeah.
You had to be an independent thinker. You had to come back with all sides of the
Well-
story, all the information, and all the video. Because if you came back with something and you didn't have it,
Right.
there was no way of getting it.
I have to
Yeah,
compliment
yeah.
her. She went to do a story out at Sylvan Beach. And there are two women sunbathing nude. And she came back with that story. She interviewed them, and of
Yeah.
course, you can't show any.
Right,
But
right.
she picked up and saw, wait a minute,
Yeah.
I could do this, and I'll do that as just a voiceover of the little community,
Right.
whatever it was we were doing. But the women bathing topless, that's the story.
Interesting
Right.
human interest. Yeah.
But
And,
there was
and it was an
also-
issue too at
It's
the
the
time. I
story.
think.
Right,
Right.
and it was part of, it was a reflection of, remember the Rochester 7 or 5? The women who would march down the street,
Right.
Rochester,
I remember
protesting that men can go topless, but
Right,
women can't.
right,
And
yep.
that was kind of a tie
This was
into
like the
that.
90s, right? I
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, it was
I remember
late
that.
80s,
Late
early
80s, early
90s.
90s.
Yeah.
So how did you find stories? So like that's an example of like you were out there to cover something else, and you happened to see something that you thought was that was a story. Like how did you find those stories?
You kind of have to be aware of your
Aware of your
surroundings.
surroundings. I will share with you I have several these seminal moments that stand out in my head. And we had a fugitive from justice.
Mhm.
They ran away during the transport at the Oneida County Jail, and they just ran away. And they were on the lam, as it were. And I remember just going to speak to the mother of the kid.
Yeah.
And there were several children in the house, and a person walks in, and I see in my peripheral vision, I think it's just the dad or something. And in my head, I go, that looks like the fugitive.
What?
I think it is. So I actually talked him into turning himself in, and I am not making this up. I called the police number
Yeah.
that, you had to memorize phone numbers then on a
Yep.
rotary dial phone,
Yep.
and had the person turn himself in, and he got put on hold. And then
Oh my
turned
gosh.
himself in, and then I convinced him it would be better for him, blah 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 blah. And
Yeah.
it's because I looked up and I had remembered and I was
Yeah.
paying
Yes.
attention,
Right.
and I'm like, well, hey, I
'Cause-
think you're familiar.
Wow.
And things like just
That's quite a story. You should have won some award for that. You
Just
know, that's
paying
a-
attention.
I know.
Right, just
Yeah.
paying
right. did you develop it into a whole story? Like, did you get the
oh,
whole thing on
absolutely,
tape?
yeah,
You know?
absolutely,
Wow.
absolutely. The photographer got video of me dialing the phone and the
Yeah.
kid getting on the phone.
So what would have happened if like that was happening and it was say like 4 o'clock and you were expected back at 5 with a story, but it's 4 o'clock, like you're supposed to be back at the studio with your story, but the story that you would have had done has developed into this like breaking news thing that you got to be there for. Well, what did you do?
My answer changes depending on where we were in the development. We didn't have live originally because
Oh.
we could have gone live. So at
Oh, you mean like live remote?
Yeah.
Live
Right.
outside this.
But
We made
Yeah.
another option. We did another option, but
yeah,
Okay.
or you called on the phone and you
Oh,
did the
okay.
old like
I
then.
remember that.
or she comes walking
Yes.
in saying, "Forget this story. I've got this story, and get out of my way. I got to get to a
Kind of
typewriter."
like stop the pressing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there were times.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd go on the air with one earring
Yeah.
because I'm talking to somebody on
On
the
the
phone.
phone.
Yeah.
And I remember, of course, people would always call. I mean, right? They'd always call. And I'm thinking, did they hear what we were talking about, or
No.
were they just looking at the fact I had one earring on?
The best thing is when people would call and say, "Do you see what's happening on TV right now?" And my favorite answer is, "No, I'm not watching TV. I'm working. I'm not watching the sitcom at the moment. I'm only paying attention to what we're going to do for the news."
Exactly.
But I think that it was such a transition in time. You have to
Yeah.
understand, when I was trained that radio is first. Radio gets the headlines.
Hmm.
Oh, really?
TV is second.
Yeah.
TV gets the pictures and shows you the scene.
Fills in some of the blanks.
Newspaper is the third because it's the next morning
Oh,
and they've had
right.
all that.
Gives you all the
That's all the
details.
details.
To process and yeah.
And so slowly, things started, you noticed that the TV station was shooting video. I mean, the newspaper was shooting video.
Right.
Because they had to put video on their website. And
Yeah,
so
yeah.
this slowly integrated into
Right.
you are everything, everywhere, all the time, because news used to be appointment
Yeah.
TV or
Right.
appointment radio.
Yeah.
It was at a certain time, and you had to go to it.
And you want to find
If you
what's
missed the
happening.
6 o'clock news, you missed the 6 o'clock news.
Right.
Now, I want the news when I want it, and I go onto the internet and I search until I find it.
Yeah.
So now that plethora of information bombarding us also makes us have to be very critical about what is news and what is
And what
accurate.
is- yeah.
So were you both in the business at the time when things were starting to blur like that? When it was becoming like
It was
multimedia?
starting. Things were starting. I kind of when I got done, because my girls were little,
Mhm.
and I really couldn't
So
do
what
the
time
hours anymore.
did you get done with?
I was done. It was after the first Children's Miracle Network telethon, '92. So I think it would have been the fall of '92.
And I was there till 96.
Right.
So I did see the blurring. I
Yeah.
did see
Yeah.
that start. I can remember very clearly that we were first with something, because
Yeah.
that was a big deal to
Being
get it
first.
first.
Yeah.
But get it first and get it right.
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 I remember that was such a big deal, and the newspaper at the time would say, well, we need this story early because they're going to have it on the air the day before, and that's not fair. That game started to happen. That's how it started to happen. But
You mean the?
But you know what
the-
happened though is our ratings from '84 to '92 were tremendous.
Yes.
Yeah,
We
yes,
were
and
actually
the next time I'm going
beating-
to ask you more about
Yeah, we
that,
were
so,
actually
yeah.
beating KTV in the key demographic women 25 or 25
Yeah.
to 54, and we had the news. What we would do with the newspaper is we'd hang it up on the wall back when there was a morning newspaper, which
Right.
wasn't there anymore, and
The
we
daily
would put
press.
X's. And I remember in '84 they were beating us, and by '86 all of a sudden red X, red X, red X. We beat them. And now we actually had a couple of reporters who would make friends with different people and say, give it to me first. And if we were working on a story, right, if you were researching, they would give it to you because they knew you'd been working on it. But you're right, the newspaper finally is catching on that
we would get it first.
we would get
Yeah,
it first, right? Yeah.
And that they could report it with depth. Is that what you mean?
Well, they could do a
we
lot
can
more,
talk more
yeah.
about that. We're going to go to commercial now. Today, I'm talking to Kathy Contino-Turner and Susan Nackley Mojave. They were television news journalists with WUTR-TV 20 Eyewitness News during the 1980s and 90s. When we come back, we'll talk about how the industry has changed, the demographics, and where the industry is going now. This is 95.5 FM The Heat. You're in the hot seat on a Media Monday. I'm Ron Klopfenstein, and I'll have more after the break. This is Ron Klopfenstein, and you're in the hot seat on a Media Monday. Go ahead. Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm talking to Kathy Contino-Turner and Susan Nackley Mojave. They were television news journalists with WTR-TV 20 Eyewitness News during the 80s and 90s. Things have changed a great deal since then. But one thing that's the same, and we were talking about this a little bit before, is demographics is so important. And Kathy, during the time that you were the news director, WTR was led in demographics over WKTV.
Yep.
First of all, what does that mean? What are demographics?
Well, what a demographic is it's your audience, it's your eyeballs, and that's when a salesperson is
It's
going
the
out.
parts of your audience.
Yeah, it's the parts of your audience.
Or like
and the key demographic is, or used to be, I don't even know if it still is, women, 25-54. Why? Because they control the money.
Yeah.
And so the furniture
Advertisers
dealer,
want
yeah,
that.
the furniture dealer will buy, and of course I worked in sales too, so
Yeah.
the furniture dealer will buy the rating that he wants because he wants those eyeballs.
Yeah.
He's not going to buy Jerry Springer if he's not reaching the women. But
Right,
the biggest,
right.
the toughest demo to reach was men 18 to 34.
Oh.
That was a real hard demo to find. And now, and we were talking about it before, and I have daughters who, are professional women, they don't watch news.
No, because
They don't.
it used
It's
to be
a-
appointment
yeah.
news. You
They
sat
just-
down, it was 6 o'clock news, watching the 6 o'clock news. The impressive thing, to speak to what Kathy was saying, is the signal used to be very different between WUTR and the other local station, which was WKTV. They were a V signal, we were a U signal. The U signal didn't go as far, it didn't go over the valleys and the hills. So there were places, like let's say used to be in the Adirondacks or more in rural areas, where they just couldn't reach our signal.
Oh, you know
Yeah.
And
that.
so
Yeah.
for us to actually beat them,
With
and a
the-
demographics was a double
Amazing.
double whammy.
Well, and it
Wow.
was helpful because
Congratulations.
of
That is
cable.
really amazing.
Well, cable
Yeah.
helped. Although, a funny
Yeah.
story, my grandmother lived in Salisbury. And she, every night would be watching KTV and wondering why she didn't see me. And I said, because Grandma, I'm on the other channel.
Oh.
She couldn't get WTR. And
Yeah.
of course, my father always said, oh, I had to get cable because you're on 20, right?
Yeah.
So
Well-
and all this is very old-fashioned. You know,
Right.
This
Yes,
is what we
right.
lived,
Yes.
and it's so different now because everybody has the world in their hand with their phone.
Right.
Mhm.
Which I will share with you. I find my frustration, and I sound like one of those old people, those old ladies, because when I see a lazy mind,
Yeah.
and they're like, I wonder whatever. I'm like, well, get off
Yeah.
your social media and Google that.
Right.
You
right.
might be able to like.
Like even
But
the
I
stuff
feel
that
like they
Google
take
at
advantage
times.
of that. They can have that information anytime they want.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
your
We had to work so hard to find any information that was factual and accurate. We had to go to the library. We had to look things up in encyclopedias.
Mhm.
And part of that inquiry and inquisitive mind led to,
Made you
I
better.
think, why I ended up in the profession. I remember
Yeah.
I was taking classes at college, and I was walking by this building, and there was construction going on forever and forever. And my journalism instructor said, who knows what's going on there? And I look around and nobody else has their hand up, and I raise my hand and I say, well, they're building an elevator because the building doesn't meet the standards for handicap accessibility. And he said, how do you know that? And I go, and now I'm a little bit embarrassed being called out. And I'm like, well, I walk by it every day on the way to class, so I asked the people what they were doing.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And he went, and that's a reporter.
Yes. Yeah.
You just look around and ask what's going on. And the detriment of young reporters
Mhm.
is that they've got their heads down in their phones and their eyes aren't up.
But I also think a detriment that I see is they're more worried about what's called FaceTime, and I'm on the air, rather than, is my story correct? Did I spell the name correctly?
Yeah.
Am I using the right grammar?
Mhm.
And that, and I always used to tell people when they came to UTR, give me 2 years and you can move on. And we were talking earlier about Jim Axelrod, is at CBS. Rob King, who you liked.
Yeah.
Sports, he's the new voice of the Pittsburgh
I'm
Steelers
so happy
on
to
radio.
hear that.
So you can go on radio and listen to him next year.
I have to say, I
Yeah?
was a huge Rob. My husband's in the room here, but before I knew him, I had a huge crush on Rob. Rob King. There were 2 times in my life that I've watched sports on TV. So one is the Laugh Olympics, ABC Saturday morning cartoons, because it blew my mind. Because it was like all the universe, all the Hanna-Barbera cartoons came together for the Olympics. Like every week, it was
shaking his
the
head, yes.
Flintstones playing against Scooby-Doo, and like, oh my God, like they all know each other, like the Jetsons know Yogi Bear, So like that was sports, and then and then Rob King.
King showed
Oh my God, he was so great. So what's he doing now?
Well, I said he's
Yeah.
the voice now of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Made national news.
Happy to hear it.
That's a
Happy
big
to hear it.
job.
It
He's a
is.
good guy,
Yes.
and it's nice
He's a
to
good
see
guy.
good people.
Yeah.
I'm
make it.
happy to
Yeah,
hear
he's
he's
a
a
good
good guy too,
He
because
was
I
a
was
good guy.
always like,
Yeah.
champion. And Colleen Riley, you said.
Darlene is doing really well.
Yeah,
Darlene
she's
Redmond.
awesome.
She
She has 2
looks,
daughters,
and
just
she
like you
looks
have 2
tremendous.
daughters.
She looks tremendous.
What
Um,
qualities do people have? Do they have, or do people have? Did you have to be successful in this field?
I think you got to be inquisitive. Number one.
That's a big question because
yeah.
it's a very
It's a
different
very different medium now.
Yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
different now. I actually, perhaps if I was trained differently and I was, the young kids, I don't enjoy that integrated.
Yeah.
I liked being TV.
What do you
Yeah.
mean integrated?
That I have to have it in print.
And I've
Oh,
got to be
I
on
see.
Facebook, and I've got to post it
Okay.
on my
Yeah,
my
I
site.
enjoyed working
Really?
with video, telling a story with video. I enjoy visuals.
Uh-huh.
I think that it can be very profound if you
Yeah.
get just the right shots and just
Yep.
Yes.
that kind of thing. And then, but knowing that my words for spoken words that somebody's only going to hear with their ear are
Right.
very different than written words.
Mhm.
And
How
then
so?
just sentence structure. You're much
Yeah.
more casual. You're much more,
Yeah.
for example, just a ridiculous example, but you hear something is short-lived. You go, well,
Yeah.
hey, that's short.
Right.
That's not correct. The correct word is short-lived.
Right.
But if
right.
I said short-lived, you would
Yeah.
think I misspoke because
Yeah.
it's a colloquialism of the area and you say short-lived.
True.
So my spoken news banter
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily be what I would want to be printed in
Right.
print.
Yeah.
Because it's a different form of writing. The AP style, it's a different form of writing.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we were trained with, you stayed in your lane, and
Right,
now it's
right.
not that way. It's very different. It
Well,
would-
how different? Though? Like, how's it different? You mean because people now have to do the whole multimedia thing, like write some
They do.
text.
right,
and
let's
some
say I
video,
worked
have
for a
picture.
newspaper.
Yeah.
I would have to get video so I could put it on the webpage for the newspaper as well.
Right.
I would have to have the story in print and
Yeah.
get all my details for when it's appropriate, but I have to get it on now because
Yeah.
people are going to be looking on
Again,
the
it's
internet.
hurry. Yeah.
Right,
Be
right.
first, be
Yeah.
first.
Yeah, and there's a concern. I often see a concern with people trying to be first and quick instead of correct.
Yeah.
And Kathy and I were just saying when we were off the air, you don't ever want to watch the news with us because we scream at the TV. When I hear
Yeah.
a news station, a network news did this, gave credit to a story to another network because they didn't have the information and they couldn't verify, but if it was wrong, they could blame it on the other network. And I was like, what have I just seen?
Yeah.
What has the world come to?
Well, why is that bad though?
Mm.
I mean, the fact that they didn't gather it themselves is what you're. I mean,
Yeah, you.
no, I mean I totally understand. I'm saying, but like Lisa attributed it though. It's like there's.
Yeah, it's good that they
yeah.
attributed it, but that was only to cover their own butt.
And
in
if
case
they're
it
like
was
a
wrong.
national network,
And you
they
shouldn't
should
put
have-
it on if you can't verify it.
Yeah.
Because that's what's happening now
Yeah.
with,
Yeah.
and I'm going to use the term, with fake news.
Yeah. Right.
And that
right.
whole trying
Yes.
to discredit the news.
Yes,
We put so much
right.
time and effort into being correct and being accurate
Yeah.
to just simply be discredited. But then people will believe anything that they see on the internet in spite of what their brain is telling them. And
Right.
sometimes you have to inquire before you repost something on your social media
You need
to
make
check
sure
it.
it's accurate.
Right.
Before you repeat something,
Or tribute.
and I always say that's
Yeah.
the old reporter in me,
Mhm.
but it's actually just being,
A good person.
Yeah,
exactly.
Principle too.
if you're gonna just repost something as truth, you better make sure it's truth.
Yep.
So how did you manage to maintain those standards when you worked in the business? I mean, you had time pressure. That
Everybody
at one
had the
point you
same
to get,
goal, I think, and our successes were all shared. And I really do think that everyone had the same goal, but we would read each other's stories,
Mhm.
and you trusted everybody. I mean, there was a lot of trust. We had working,
Trusting in your sources.
and
if,
and
Yeah.
trusting in your people who you were working with. You knew they had the same goal. You know,
like accuracy.
yeah,
the integrity.
Yeah, integrity.
Yeah.
It was important.
Yeah.
I can think of two kind of integrity moments and how they came back. When AIDS, remember the 80s was when AIDS
Mhm.
actually had been around but didn't hit mainstream media,
Yep.
to be truthful.
Yep.
And we had a nurse working in the prison who got
I remember
pricked
that.
with a needle
Mhm.
and got
Yeah.
AIDS
Yes.
Yep.
and subsequently passed away.
Yep.
They did not release her name when she passed away.
Right.
But because we didn't have electronic files, I kept a paper copy of all my stories.
Yeah.
And something niggled my brain when they talked about her past, and I flipped through, and I knew her name,
Yeah.
and I knew her face,
Yeah.
and we could have shown it.
Right.
And I talked to Kathy about it, and we both
Right.
agreed that we couldn't do that.
Yeah.
They didn't want, I mean, that's integrity.
Right. Right.
It didn't
Yeah.
help the story.
No.
Right.
It
Right.
didn't.
Right.
And then fast forward to after Kathy had left, there was
Yeah.
a terrible Christmas Eve accident, a fatality, and a child died. And the photographer that I was with did what they were supposed to do and shot the scene, just
Yeah.
shot all the video.
Yeah.
Well, when I found out it was what happened, nobody
Right.
else in the whole entire world was endangered. It was just this single family's tragedy on a snowy night.
Right. Right.
There was no need for the
Yeah.
close-ups. There was
Right.
a child's shoe that was in the road, and there was so we
Well, we did that a few times too,
And-
pulling video of a stabbing, for example.
Yeah,
Again, your
you felt this
photographer's
too,
doing the
like-
job, and I remember it was over by MVCC, and he got into the house. I don't, but there was blood everywhere, and we didn't show it.
Yeah.
And we would be very. Remember the first Gulf War, when the first Gulf War started, and the first person died. I think it was a young man from Richfield Springs. And I called the family and I said, listen, I don't know with the funeral, do you want us there or not? I was the only we were the only media, I don't want to say UTR was the only media that called them.
Yeah.
And they did an interview with us. They wouldn't talk to anybody else because we called and
Because
we
of that.
asked permission.
Yeah.
Can we come and cover your son's funeral? And if you don't want us there, we're not going to show up.
Well, and I
Right?
think part of this is being a local reporter.
Yeah.
You have to remember
You're part of
where
the
you
community.
are.
Yes.
And so to finish that other story, that Christmas Eve fatality, years later, about 25 years later, I'm chatting with someone, and they tell me that they had this accident and
Yeah.
they lost a child, and I'm like, oh my God, I covered
There
you.
was some-
I didn't remember the name, I just,
Right.
and I thank God I had
For the
the
restraint.
integrity and the
Yeah.
respect because they're local. We're
Yeah,
local
right.
reporters. There's somebody's family. You probably know them. It's a small area,
Yeah.
and you have to. And so that's very different than if you're a
Yes.
big network reporter.
Yeah.
You know, that's very different.
You must have had to really like have these concerns first, you know, these it must have been like on the forefront of your mind during the Sara Anne Wood time, because such a big
Yeah.
story and a tragedy, and kind of like a tragedy where like really everybody in the area was following it, and really probably following your work pretty intensely.
So here's one thing that so Kathy mentioned several times about the integrity of
Yeah.
not taking a side and presenting the facts.
Right.
And I remember being awestruck that we all on the air were wearing the light blue ribbons
Yeah.
because we weren't supposed to take a side.
Right,
But quite
right.
frankly, there is no side on
There
this.
is no
something
side.
like that.
That,
Yeah.
you know,
right.
everybody was
Yeah.
the area
Yeah.
was coming together. I actually still keep in touch with Sarah's brother.
Yeah.
The family was just lovely and going through such a horrible tragedy with such dignity, but the whole community went through it with them. Somebody who worked with us had a child and they named the child's middle
Really?
name Sara for Sara Anne Wood. It really,
Yeah.
I was pregnant at the time.
Wow.
Talk about things leaving imprints on you.
Yeah. Must have.
Yep.
And that was a story that had very local implications, but
Yeah.
went national.
Yeah, right. And when the story, like that story went on and on and on, how do you keep it like, how did you keep your audience following you? I mean, because you talk a lot about like times when you showed restraint and principles and integrity and stuff, and it sounds like it paid off. You had, you know, the ratings were high and stuff. And how do you get the audience to want quality journalism?
I don't know. I think it's what you do day to day to day. I used to laugh when I first got to UTR during ratings, and ratings would be November, February,
Me, right?
May, and July.
Oh, it's July too?
And July, yeah.
Was that the
And
same
July's
one for-
kind of a throwaway because the hot levels, houses using television, are lower.
Yeah,
But still, July is a rating period.
yeah.
And there would be signs all over in the station, look good, look good. And I remember saying in a meeting to the former news director, I said, well, if we're not doing the job every day, people aren't going to tune in just because it's ratings.
Right.
And I think Susan can say, I mean, people still recognize us. And
Yeah.
and that is
There's a lot
so,
of interest in this show.
But no,
I mean,
there's-
really. Yeah.
it's so gratifying
Yeah.
that, you know, people don't run up to you and throw holy water on you. Right? And thank you.
Yeah. For
Right?
quality work.
And there was some tough stuff. I mean, we had Ed Hanna. That was a tough one with him.
he especially.
That was
Yeah.
really a tough one. And
How did you
Well,
handle
he
him?
especially didn't. When
Did
I
he ever
can-
yell at you?
Yes, and of course he
Yeah.
and I are the same. We have the same ethnic background. And I would go to interview him, and he said, and I remember this like it was yesterday. Here's something you're going to want to put on the air. Blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
So we learned very quickly because it wasn't the area of time of AI or anything,
Yeah.
to give him just a really long soundbite.
Mm.
So there was no editing, there was no, so I literally put in there, here's what you're gonna wanna put on the air, and he said blah, 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 blah. And then he called me and yelled at me for putting that on the air, and I said, but you said, here's what you wanted me to put. He goes, you're a Lebanese traitor.
well, before he got
I love
elected
that.
mayor, he
Yeah.
came back from Ithaca, and he's going to run for mayor. And he sent us a fax that said, I'm only going to answer questions via fax. And I said, well, I'm sorry, Mr. Hanna, but we will interview you, and I will certainly give you equal time when I interview the current mayor. And so we had a series of stories. You had one, Luke Michaels had one where on primary night they locked the doors to the primary headquarters, wouldn't let us in. His guys stood in the window
Really?
and blocked. And we had all these stories. We had the fact story. We had him swearing at me at a pool. And what had happened was I'd gone down to New York to do promos with Peter Jennings, and I went out to dinner that night with Joe Kasha, who was a former news director at WABC New York, and he was now working for the network. And he asked me, and I told him, he said, we're having this problem. This guy was mayor before, he's running, he's giving us a lot of problems. And he said, what's your best news night? I said, well, Thursday. And I told him about the stories we had. I said, we haven't run any of them. He goes, run them all. So the Thursday before the election, remember, we ran them, and we did group reporting and team reporting, years before anybody else was doing it. And it went one story to one story to one story to one story. And he got beat, and oh my goodness, the threats. The threats that happened after that.
Well, you know what? That's nothing compared to nowadays.
No.
That was nothing.
We're going to hear more about this. Today I'm talking to Kathy Contino-Turner and Susan Nackley Mojave. They were television news journalists with WTR-TV 20 Eyewitness News during the 80s and 90s. Black History Month was celebrated with an event this Saturday at the Oneida County History Center. When we come back, some of my interview with Erin Woodman from the Oneida County NAACP. This is 95.5 FM The Heat. You're in the hot seat on a Media Monday. I'm Ron Klopfenstein. More after the break.
Thank you, Utica.
This is Ron Klopfenstein, and you're in the hot seat on a Media Monday. Welcome back, everyone. Today we're joined by Kathy Contino-Turner and Susan Nackley Mojave, television journalists at WTR-TV 20 Eyewitness News during the 80s and 90s. In a moment, we're going to talk more about their time covering the news. But first, February is Black History Month, and the Oneida County NAACP kicked things off with an event Saturday at the Oneida County History Center. Erin Woodman, who was on the show 2 weeks ago, was the MC, Master of Ceremonies. He did a great job. I interviewed him about the meaning and the importance of Black History Month. Here's some of that conversation.
So we are celebrating Black History
thinking there's
Month.
records on the
Specifically,
floor.
it goes along with the theme of African Americans and labor. So we're here to recognize the past, present, and future African American labor here to our local economy and
but you're
abroad.
taller
So it's
than me,
really
so
about
we're not
empowering people to know that they have some economic power to contribute to our society.
Are there any other reasons why it's important to observe this year?
Mine's coming in.
Yeah, this is important because Black history is American history. I mean, our contributions
You have to leave it on, right?
the society has really helped transform the way that we have lived and functioned together. So really, Black history is part of our American history.
Isn't it?
Times of celebration.
Where do you get it?
That was Erin Woodman of the Oneida County NAACP. I spoke to him on Saturday at the Black History Month kickoff event at the Oneida County History Center. Next week on the Hot Seat Media Monday, we'll have the cast and crew of Rome Community Theater's first date. We're also going to be giving away 2 tickets to the show. Also next week, our friend Sarah Macri from the United Way of the Mohawk Valley is going to stop in to talk about the 2-on-1 program. We'll also have more on Black History Month this month on Hot Seat Media Monday. And at the end of the month, we're going to have burlesque performers here on the Hot Seat Media Monday. I've never been to a burlesque show, but it's going to be fun. We're going to have them right here on the show. We could probably sell tickets to that, instead of selling ads here. But today, I'm talking to Kathy Contino-Turner and Susan Nackley Mojave, WUTR-TV 20 Eyewitness News. And back in the 90s, Susan, you're the first person who ever interviewed me in the media, my first time in the media. Well, no, actually, I wrote for the OD first. I wrote columns for the OD. I wrote a column, and then a coming out column. This was on July 4th, 1991. I came out in the Sunday OD, and then you did a story on me. I think it was probably that Monday. You came to the house. So this would have been like July 7th, 1991. You did a story on me.
1991.
Yep. And it was the first time I was ever on TV.
It seems like I've just always known you.
It does.
Yeah,
It
right?
does seem like that. Yeah, yeah.
I hope it was painless.
It was great.
You
It was
weren't
great.
traumatized by it because you're still in the
I
business.
loved it. I was like, I really like this. And it also gave me a sense, plus the OD too, because I was a columnist there. It gave me a sense very early on that media can be used for good.
Telling your story.
Yeah, and for me, like, I always approach it a little bit differently. I've never been purely news, because I do have, I do come at it as a gay rights activist. I did then, and now as a progressive. But, it showed me, like, right from the start, like, just being out there and just telling the truth. The truth is power. you know?
And I also did learn early on. So as a cub reporter, I think they still use that expression. When you were a young reporter, you used to be called a cub reporter.
Yep.
You know, everybody wanted the lead story. Oh, you know what? There was this big news conference. I wish I had gotten that story. Then I quickly realized the more interesting stories was the kindergarten on May 1st is doing a maypole.
Right.
And you get much more exciting video, and you can be much more creative because it's the who, what, when, where, and why of a regular news story that's everybody's going to have the same. But you go to those human interest stories.
Exactly.
That's where the heart is.
And that brings in viewers, if I might be so bold, because if I'm in, all those kids in the kindergarten class have, you know, parents and grandparents, and, you know what I mean?
Right.
And those are the stories that the people remember. I can remember a news day, we had a bank in New Hartford that was the ATM. They were kind of newer at the time, and they no matter what, would just spit out 20s like crazy. It was just spitting out money.
Really?
And,
I didn't know about that.
And everybody was like,
I would have wanted an ATM
that's
card.
the news. That's what everybody's talking about.
Right.
I don't know what happened, you know, at City Hall, but boy, everybody was talking about that. Just spitting out $20 bills.
Yep.
So sometimes it's the human interest things that catch people's attention.
I really think that's true. I did a story. I like to interview when I do politicians. I like talking about like who they really are. You know, when Marion Buttonshine, I went to her Christmas tree farm. She talked to me about the ornaments that her grandchildren made and her kids made in school, how she uses them on her Christmas tree. And like when I think back, she also talked a lot about catalytic converters and how she had to build to like prevent the thefts. But the Christmas tree thing, that's what I remember. You know, it's like that human stuff that makes us who we are.
And
know?
that's the point about being a local reporter.
Exactly.
They're local people. And because of Kathy, one of the more popular segments we were talking was Kathy's big into the Humane Society.
Animals.
Oh, right.
And
the pet segment.
we started, she started live, bringing live pets in. We
Every
had
Friday.
Rome
So that was
and
an
Stephen
innovation
Swan.
at the time.
Yeah.
That was a very big deal.
Wow.
at the
Well, what
time.
we were doing is we were doing what we called menu. Every day we did something different. We did the kids' corner because we were, and the kids' corner worked because then we had those pieces to run in the first telethon, the first CMN telethon. We should really talk about that because doing that the first time was amazing. But the pet, I gotta say, the pet segment. Susan did the pet segment one night. I forget why. I normally did it, but you were gonna do it. Well, the dog, what did he do? He
Brutus.
ran.
His name was Brutus. I remember.
And it was with Lynn Rosen from Rome Humane.
Yep.
And the dog went off. He did something, and the two of them started laughing, and they could not stop.
The dog, she's trying to hold on to the
So
dog.
funny.
She's this little bit of a thing, and this was a big dog named Brutus.
Brutus.
And it flipped her, like her chair flipped her. And so I put my hand on the chair so her feet wouldn't flip
Susan's
up.
like, okay, Brutus.
And then the dog, and I'm like, come here, Brutus. And the dog was like gone, and we're live, and the dog's running around like with the zoomies, and we are hysterical.
It was the funniest. It was so funny.
The dog got adopted.
He did.
So
you know, people used to
make
line
people
up
laugh
on Saturday morning at the
To adopt
shelter
those dogs.
when we featured the dog.
Wow.
And that was, I mean, that was, you were making a difference. Of course, that's near and dear to my heart.
Right.
But Children's Miracle Network, I have to say, we started in '92, the very first one. And we were like, well, how are we ever going to do this?
the very first one we had to go to Syracuse.
No. Syracuse was after that. Oh, no, you're right.
No, it was like our
and
practice.
fill in. We filled in.
And
yeah,
they gave
in
us
91.
like the worst shift late at night. But we got
So
an
people
experience.
called, you answered the phone and said like, this is Susan Nackley from WTR.
No, we didn't answer the phone. We
Oh,
were
No,
okay.
they were the
hosting it.
hosting.
Oh, you
But
were
I
hosting,
have to
okay.
say, you and I, at the first Children's Miracle Network, we had torrential rain all weekend, which God helped us.
Yeah.
And Susan and I were on at 4 a.m. And the phone started ringing, and
Wow.
they did not stop. We got laughing about it, but we raised, was it 82,000?
Oh my God.
Which is
big deal
nothing.
then.
That is a big
Because
deal.
our goal was 50,
Yeah.
and we show up at the station that night, and they've only got 25,000 in hand.
Yeah.
So we raised, what was the math there? 50, 60,000 on the
Wow.
phones,
Yeah.
which was
Just
unheard of. We
talking
actually
on
got
the
an
air?
award the next year at CMN. I wasn't there for it because I
Congratulations.
left that fall.
Yes,
Yeah.
and I will share with you what they thought we had made a mistake.
Because it was so
Because
much.
the percentage of money you get on the phone for a telethon is very small.
Mhm.
You actually get your money from those people that do it all year long and they present the big
right.
check.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's where the
yeah,
money. Yeah.
right,
But
right.
because this area's got big heart.
Yeah.
It's got big
Yeah.
heart. and we were telling stories of real little kids
Yeah.
real people
We're benefiting
in
from
our
that,
area,
sure.
Yep.
and the phones and they thought we had made a mistake with our numbers because we had raised the most on the phones.
Per capita
Wow.
of any place in the United States.
Because the phone, literally just people picking up the phones.
And you went to labor during the.
Well, that was later. Yeah, one of the later telethons. Yeah.
So I was 2
I
weeks.
bet that got a lot of calls.
I
a lot of
was 2
response.
weeks overdue, and my husband said,
Uh.
"I know you're just waiting to deliver during the telethon." I'm like, I don't really think I have any control over
That's
this.
a good plan.
And I delivered late Friday night, and
Wow.
Saturday morning we were doing a live shot. It was for labor and delivery.
Oh my gosh.
And,
And there was Susan.
and I had a baby in my 10.5-pound baby in
Yeah.
my arms.
You,
Well,
you did a story too on a friend of the family, Kelsey Finnegan. She was born, and like you stayed in
She
touch
was a
with them.
leap year baby.
Yes, yes,
I
yes.
still
So,
keep
so
it-
my sister said, I gotta say that to remind you because I know they remember you, you remember them. So yes, leap
Yes,
year baby.
and
So-
they're actually very good dear friends now.
It's so great. What is it like to have that connection? You know, I really like that kind of thing, like with the audience. I really love that, like
I like it when
people that
people
would
will
read my
yeah.
stuff, and
Yeah.
it feels good.
Yeah.
Like, can you describe like what is that like?
Well, when they come up to you and talk to you, and of course my daughters would always laugh at me because people would come up to me and they would know me. Well, I mean, we were in their living room every night.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you
right,
might not
right.
know them, but they know you
Right,
because you
right.
are there. And
Yeah.
I would, always be very polite, and I would sometimes reintroduce myself. Sometimes I wouldn't. I would just
Yeah.
talk to them. And my daughter Alyssa pulled me aside and she says, "You didn't know who that was, did you?" And,
My
16-year-old
husband's
kid.
like nodding his head because I do that all
16-year-old
the
kid.
time. You know.
But the funny thing with me was I was the first pregnant woman on television.
Really?
And oh my Lord, did that send
Well, I must have been the
shockwaves?
second.
What?
Shockwaves.
You were the
Oh,
first pregnant woman on television.
yeah, the first anchor.
And like what? This was the 80s.
Yeah, 88,
Oh my
87,
God.
And when
88.
she turned sideways to do the weather, she covered Texas.
I did. And we would get, I hate
Well,
to say
even
it,
a
but
female anchor was kind of unusual back then.
yeah,
A little bit.
news
'Cause I
director
remember,
was
like,
really strange.
I think it was like Ann Nobles maybe at WKTV in the 70s was the first maybe.
Well, there was, what's her name? She was married to Giuliani. What was her name?
Oh,
Donna Hanover.
Donna Hanover.
Yeah,
yeah,
and
right, right.
yeah, but
I mean, that
I was the
yeah.
first one
Oh,
that
that's
was
right. She was local
pregnant.
too, right? Wasn't she local too?
Who?
Donna Hanover.
I don't know if she
Was
was,
she-
or not. I don't know.
Was she ever at WKTV? Well,
She was
I mean,
at KTV,
but I mean the whole thing about like. I
but
mean,
it made people
it was
very
a big
nervous.
thing. Why?
And then, of course, for me,
why were
they
they
gave me
nervous?
these awful clothes to wear, and with big bows and things, right? And you couldn't wear. I mean, I look at the women now, that are on network that are pregnant and they're
Yeah.
tight and they're showing their belly, great.
They want you to hide.
But
it.
I would always get men calling, and they would say things like, "It's not that I'm against motherhood, but shouldn't she be sitting down?" Yeah.
Wow.
And
Oh my
there
gosh.
was the one night we talked about when I actually was
She
coming back
fell.
from the weather. And I
Oh.
was stepping up, I'm talking,
Yeah,
we're still
yeah.
talking, and I
Oh, I bet
went
they'd be
down on my
really
knees,
nervous.
and they're all, I said, I'm all, just like in It's a Wonderful Life, I'm all right, I'm all right. But yeah, that was really kind of strange.
So
Now,
I
did you
had-
have sexism at all? Like, did you? experience
Oh,
anything?
please, yeah.
We agreed we weren't going to get into
We
that.
weren't gonna get into that.
Maybe another show. We'll do another show.
It
down
would
the
be a
road,
whole
yes.
show.
No,
So, yeah.
no.
But I will tell you what was lovely and endearing is that I got married.
Yeah.
While I was on the air,
Mhm.
basically, and I had people just come to the church to see me get married.
That is
Mhm.
nice.
I
Oh my
had,
gosh.
and I got, when I was pregnant and had a baby, people just
Same
sent
thing.
gifts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sent gifts.
So there's
Wow.
loveliness, but
Yes.
then there's also,
Oh yeah, there are.
I
There
can
is.
tell you that I was overdue,
Yeah.
huge, big baby, and somebody called who must have been a snowbird.
Mm.
And they were away all winter, and I had a spring baby, and they called the station and were terribly offended
Cruel.
at the weight I had gained
Cruel.
Oh my
and what
gosh.
she's let herself go, because I'm sitting here,
Wow.
they can't see,
Yeah.
and they also don't realize that it's a small station and we answer our own phones. And she
Yeah.
was the lady was talking to me.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, oh, well, we like to understand our demographics. Are you local? Yes. Are you a mother? Yes. I go, well, I'm pregnant. That's why I gained weight. And she just hung up the phone.
Well, and yeah, you would get people calling.
Yeah.
I remember we had this very pretty girl, Lori Lasowski, and I had someone call and say, "Can't she grow her eyebrows closer together?" Or they would call and they would,
your scarf that you wore.
right, or
they
say to
didn't
me,
like.
why did you wear that? You wore that a week ago Tuesday. And I'm thinking, honey, I can't
Oh
even
my
remember what I
gosh,
wore
know,
yesterday.
exactly. Yeah.
And yeah, so
So
there
for the most part, it
most
was
people
good,
were
but
very
it's,
nice.
it's
But there
tough
is a
being in the
downside,
public
yeah.
eye.
Mhm.
And I can imagine, like, you know, doing stuff that I did, like, back then with the gay right stuff, like with Facebook back then. Like, if there was a Utica OD Facebook page in the 90s, back when I was coming out, you know, like, just you see, like, so much, like, negativity and stuff on social media, around media. Why don't people value the media?
I don't know why they take it
I mean,
out
some
on the
people-
media.
yeah,
It's
why do they
almost
take it out?
like you're killing the messenger,
Yeah.
right?
I think it's an easy target.
and it's an easy,
Oh, yeah.
I think it's
Yeah.
an easy
Right?
target. I think that
They're
you know,
not
there's-
saying what I want them to say.
There's the yin and the yang to everything, and
Yeah.
it's a two-edged sword. And you can focus on the negative, you can focus on the positive. And the positive, what you're talking about, is you affect people's lives, and you're a part of the community, and you get to know people.
Yes.
And sometimes strange things happen. It was raining out, and I was at the grocery store, and somebody handed me their baby so they could just go to the car and bring it up, and and they
'Cause they
just
knew her.
handed me their kid. I was like,
nice.
oh,
Yeah.
okay.
'Cause they trusted you. 'Cause
Yeah,
know
they
you.
didn't
Yeah.
know me,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
so, and the trick is to
Yeah.
not take advantage of that.
Right.
You know, when you're in
Exactly.
line,
Yeah.
wait
Oh,
your
right.
turn. You
Oh,
don't
yeah.
push your way.
Exactly.
Things-
Or don't get in free.
just
It's-
to be
you
a
You really
Yeah.
have
person.
to be kind of like the way that you act in the media. In real life, you gotta be like that totally. Like if a stranger comes up to you, like if you're friendly on the radio, you gotta be friendly. You know.
Well, you
Same.
have
But
to
I mean,
be,
I am though. So
you have to be
This is
careful.
kind of like what I'm actually like, so it's
Yeah.
easy.
Works good for
but-
you.
Yeah, so it's easy. But
you can't have an opinion.
Yeah.
You know, I can have an opinion now,
Yeah.
but I
yeah.
could not have an
'Cause
opinion
people won't
then.
take you seriously.
I didn't register with a political party then,
Wow.
because I did not want to show any kind of a
Anything
bias at all.
bias.
And what it gratifies me when people still come up to me,
Mhm.
and I've been off for a very long time, you know, and I got gray hair now, and
Me too.
you know, you know, and it's just very gratifying for people to say, oh, gee, I remember you, thank you for what you did. You know, you were
Yeah.
just doing your job, but it's really nice.
My favorite thing is what you just did.
Yeah.
You interviewed me, but you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and they remember.
It makes such an impression.
And that was something don't get me wrong. Remember, Kathy said if you were out in the morning, you did 5, 6, however
Yeah.
many stories, and,
Right.
and we did.
Yep.
You had to go from
You
place
probably
to
don't
place.
remember it, but
place.
I did.
Quickly.
Yeah.
But everybody you interview, it might
Yeah.
be their first time or their
Right.
only
Mhm.
time. You
Right.
have to be patient.
Yes.
I want to be like, I don't care what
gotta
your
go.
hair looks like. I got another appointment.
Yeah.
But it's
Right.
important
I
to
think
them.
nowadays,
To be
like,
courteous.
one thing I always think about, like when I write about someone, is that like it could be that for the rest of their life, I could be the first thing that comes up on their Google search. So
Ooh.
like it's a powerful thing to be accurate and fair and like you know. So what can people do to be a good news consumer?
Go to different sources. Don't just accept Fox News as gospel.
Yeah.
Don't accept what you see online as gospel. Susan mentioned this early. You have to go and you have to read and you have to look. And you know, and read a book, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
I mean, pick up a book and read it. I just read Martin Luther King, Where Do We Go From Here? I would recommend that book for anyone right now to read it.
Martin Luther King, where do we
you-
go from here?
Where do we go from here? And you've got to think. You've got to be able to think and what's happening in the world. And again, we joke about news, and I get very upset when I hear a sentence that I think is editorializing. I'm like, wait a minute, that sentence you just said, you made an editorial comment.
I think
Yeah.
part of it is if you are gracious in your mind and hold space for
Mhm.
somebody else's opinion,
Mhm.
it allows you to find the facts. Because as we know, algorithms on our social
Okay.
media, if I like red apples,
Yeah.
suddenly red apples are coming up
Right,
everywhere. We
right.
know that.
Right.
So you have to hold space for other people's opinions that you don't necessarily agree with. And then if you have that in your mind, it allows you to research
Yeah.
and read or if this just doesn't make sense,
Yeah.
Mhm.
maybe inquire.
Yeah.
Keep
Then maybe
reading.
it
It's
isn't.
easy to research. Just
Right.
Google, you can get
It's so much
international-
easier now
Yeah.
with
right,
with the
you
internet.
can get
Yeah.
USA News
Yeah.
from other countries,
Countries,
and
other
see what their
perspectives and-
BBC.
Oh, I
see-
would definitely
Right.
recommend the BBC.
Yeah.
If you
yeah.
watch the BBC, you'll hear things about us that you're not hearing.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And a shout out too
Oh,
for
absolutely.
like NPR and PBS that
NPR.
Yes.
are going to be under fire, you know. So, thank you for doing this. I'd like to maybe like down the road do more shows like this. This is really good. This talk that
We always have fun, don't we?
We
this
have
is
a good
really
time.
great, you know. And it's really interesting. Like news is it's so important. You know, we have to talk about these things. I think it's just so important.
And we can't be,
you know?
and at this
Yeah.
time, we can't be fatigued.
We
We have
can't.
to hold the course. We
Right.
have to pay attention.
And we have to like put a lot of effort into our life as consumers of news.
Thank
It's a
Yep.
business. So my guests today were Kathy Contino-Turner and Susan Nackley from WUTR-TV 20 Eyewitness News in the 80s and 90s. Thank you to my sound engineer, Jonathan Brooks. He's DJ J-Easy. He'll be up next. Jim Hill, our photographer, who recorded the show for YouTube and for podcast. Nabil Khan is our entertainment correspondent. Look for the show Wednesday at uticaphoenix.net/Media Monday. I'm Ron Clough-Signing. This has been the Hot Seat on a Media Monday. Now I'm going to kick things over to J-Easy for the easy ride home.
WUSP,